Right now, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the water is heating up faster than at any point since we started keeping records 150 years ago. Not since 2015. Not since 1997. The fastest ever measured. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the people whose entire job is preparing for this, insurers, farmers, entire governments, are running out of time to do it. This is El Niño. And this year, for the first time in over a decade, forecasters are using a word they almost never say out loud: super. You've probably heard the term tossed around on the news for years, usually right before someone says winter is going to be wetter than normal. But almost nobody actually knows what's happening underneath that word, and that gap is exactly why this keeps catching entire countries off guard. Here's the mechanism, in one breath. Normally, trade winds blow warm surface water across the Pacific, piling it up near Asia and Australia. Every few years, those winds weaken, sometimes even reverse, and all that warm water sloshes back east toward South America. That warm pool doesn't just sit there quietly. It reshapes the jet stream, shifts rainfall belts, and reroutes storm tracks for the entire planet. That reshaping is El Niño. There's a strange bit of history baked into the name itself. Peruvian fishermen coined the term centuries ago because the warm current that killed off their normal catch every few years usually showed up right around Christmas. El Niño literally means the little boy, a reference to the Christ child. Nobody was thinking about global weather models. They just noticed the fish disappeared on a cycle and named whatever was doing it. This event is also arriving after several years leaning the opposite direction, toward El Niño's cooler counterpart, La Niña. That swing from one extreme to the other is part of why the transition feels so abrupt. Infrastructure, crop plans, and insurance pricing all get calibrated for one pattern, and then the ocean flips underneath them. A Super El Niño simply means that warm pool crosses 2 degrees Celsius above normal. 2 degrees sounds tiny. Spread across an ocean the size of the Pacific, that's an almost unimaginable amount of extra heat energy. And all of it has to go somewhere. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Every major forecasting center on Earth, NOAA in the US, the European Weather Agency, Australia's Bureau of Meteorology, is looking at the same ocean data right now and landing on the same conclusion. 11 out of 13 model runs currently project this event reaches full Super El Niño strength. 8 of those 13 say it could exceed the previous record holder, the event from 1982. And right now, the ocean is warming faster than it did at the same point in either 1997 or 2015, the last 2 Super El Niños on record. Some forecasters are reaching even further back for a comparison, all the way to a single event in 1877, because that may be the only thing in a century and a half of measurements that comes close to what's forming now. You don't even have to go back that far to see this pattern cause damage. The most recent El Niño, in 2023 into 2024, was only a moderate to strong event, nowhere near what's forming now. And it still drove a parade of atmospheric rivers into California that overwhelmed reservoirs built around drought planning, flooded towns that hadn't seen serious water in years, and buried the Sierra Nevada in one of its heaviest snowpacks on record. That was the warm-up act. What's forming for winter 2026 is currently tracking stronger than that event, stronger than 2015, and potentially stronger than anything in the last century and a half. So what does a record Super El Niño actually do to the world, beyond just a warmer winter? In the southern United States, expect a stormier season. More rain, more snow, a higher chance of flooding. On the West Coast, higher seas mean more days of flooding at high tide, even with no storm in sight. Flip to the other side of the Pacific and the pattern reverses. Australia and Southeast Asia tend to get hotter and drier, which means a sharp jump in wildfire risk across both regions. And because all of this heat is stacking on top of decades of background warming, forecasters now expect 2026 and 2027 to compete for the hottest years ever measured on the planet. Farmers get squeezed by the timing of all this more than almost anyone. Planting decisions for an entire growing season get locked in months before the ocean confirms which direction it's swinging. And by the time a Super El Niño is officially confirmed, it's often too late to switch which crops go into the ground, or to insure against the specific disaster now actually headed their way. Here's the part almost nobody connects to their own life. The last Super El Niño, back in 2015, helped wipe out roughly 7 million tons of global sugar production in a single cycle. It hammered Indonesia's palm oil harvest hard enough to send vegetable oil prices climbing worldwide. It cut into Vietnam's coffee output during a drought that hit Robusta beans especially hard, and it knocked enough production out of Australia's wheat fields to tighten the global grain supply. None of that shows up in a weather forecast. All of it shows up on a grocery receipt, months later, and almost nobody ever traces it back to a patch of unusually warm ocean water on the other side of the planet. So, if the forecast is this consistent and the warning lead time is measured in months, you'd expect everyone downstream to already be preparing for it. They mostly aren't. The regions most exposed to Super El Niño flooding are still running drainage systems and levees sized for an average winter, because upgrading them for a once-in-a-generation event is expensive and politically unpopular right up until the water is already in someone's living room. Insurance pricing still leans on historical averages that go stale the moment a record-breaking event shows up. And reinsurance contracts. The giant policies that backstop your local insurer typically get repriced only once a year, which means a chunk of this exact risk may not show up in anyone's premium until after the damage is already done. And a lot of the places about to flip from drought conditions straight into deluge just spent the last couple of years bracing for exactly the opposite problem. If you want patterns like this explained before they become a headline instead of after, that's the whole point of this channel. Hitting subscribe just means you catch the next one. We've actually run this exact experiment before, twice. The 1997-98 Super El Niño is still considered one of the most damaging weather events of the 20th century. The United Nations puts the global death toll above 20,000 people, mostly from flooding, landslides, and the droughts and fires that came with the drier side of the same pattern. Some economic studies trace more than $5 trillion in global losses to the years that followed it. During that same event, Peru alone saw catastrophic flooding that washed out roads, bridges, and entire towns along its northern coast, while at the very same time, drought-fueled fires tore through Indonesia's rainforests, blanketing Southeast Asia in smoke for months. Same global event, two opposite disasters, 10,000 miles apart. The 2015-16 event, the strongest on NOAA's official record until now, triggered a global coral bleaching event so severe that some reef systems still haven't fully recovered a decade later. There's also a cost that almost never makes the headlines. When El Niño shifts rainfall patterns, it doesn't just flood some places and dry out others. It changes where mosquitoes and the diseases they carry can survive. Health researchers have tracked spikes in malaria and dengue in parts of South America and East Africa during past strong El Niño years, along with cholera outbreaks that follow flooding into contaminated water supplies. A pattern most people file under wet winter has, in past cycles, quietly reshaped disease outbreaks on 3 separate continents. And here's the detail that should really change how you think about all of this. El Niño isn't happening in a vacuum anymore. Every Super El Niño on record has landed on top of whatever the planet's baseline temperature already was. In 1997, that baseline was lower. In 2015, it was higher. In 2026, it's higher still, which is exactly why forecasters keep reaching for the word record before the event has even finished forming. Models currently agree this one strengthens through fall and peaks in the northern hemisphere winter of 2026 into 2027, which means the flooding, the fires, the record heat, that's not behind you. It's still ahead of you. The lead time is the one genuine advantage anyone actually has here. So what does actually using that lead time look like if you're watching this instead of waiting for a storm warning? Standard home insurance doesn't cover flood damage at all in most places, and most flood policies carry a waiting period of several weeks before they even take effect. So waiting until the first alert is already too late. Checking whether your local flood maps have been updated since the last major event costs about 10 minutes. On the drought and fire side of the planet, the same lead time applies to clearing defensible space around a home and sorting out water storage before the dry season locks in. None of that is exciting. All of it is the difference between reading about the damage and becoming the damage. The Pacific Ocean already decided how this winter plays out. The only question still open is whether the rest of us actually listen before it arrives, or after it does.